Okay, welcome back everyone to the second hour on As Above So Below Radio. I'm your host Martin Hodgson and I'm glad that you're tuning in. My guest again here is Lucy Pringle and she's an international authority on the crop circle phenomenon. She's also an aerial photographer, an author, a lecturer, as well as a contributing writer to various publications. Okay, Lucy, before we proceed for the second hour here, I want to ask you how challenging is it to do the research and what do you do to make it possible to pretty much get the funding for your research?
Well, the funding is always a problem because I'm entirely self-funded. And it really is a great problem. I have various things on my website, my photographs and my merchandise, but what I can realistically charge for any of my goods falls very far short of what I actually need to fund my research and also the flying. And I just feel that there's an awful lot on the website that needs continuing to be updated year by year. And if I run out of funds, which I'm close to doing, in fact, I'm really wondering how much longer I can go on, then there are going to be increasing gaps on the website, and I'll have to really cut down on what I can do. And this is going to affect in years to come, when I think really the significance of the crop circles hasn't fully been realized. I think it's only in times to come that the full extent of the importance of this phenomenon will be fully appreciated, and a database that is really reliable and comprehensive is of the essence. And this is why I'm really seriously worried that I'm not going to be able to continue. So funding is really desperately needed in order to let me continue. I think I've got to the stage where, working with scientists from all over the world, we have come to the stage where my research is becoming increasingly important. We are getting results with regards to Parkinson's condition, Parkinson's disease, where we're finding that people who go into crop circles have relief, albeit temporary. But we're now finding that it's all to do with brain activity and the levels in which this actually occurs, which is the gamma level of brain activity, which is between 30 and 72 hertz per second. And in that particular range, the brain produces dopamine naturally. Now, dopamine is one of the chemicals which is missing in the majority of Parkinson's sufferers. This is a huge step forward, and a step forward which I believe can be of value to mankind. So this is, yes, I'm sending out a huge plea for people to really send me whatever they can manage to send me, in the knowledge that all the money I spend is spent faithfully on my research, to further the database, the comprehensive database, and to further the research.
All right. When you talk about funding the research, you're also referring to hiring a pilot to fly you over these crop circles. And
oh, yes, and that costs £500 an hour. Well, it costs over £500 an hour, and in fact, in US dollars, I think that is about £800 an hour, $800 an hour, and I have to go up several times. I have to fly in helicopters as required by the CAA, which is the Civil Aviation Board. So the expenses are absolutely gigantic, and it's by the aerial photography that people can work out the mathematics. I can give lectures, I can show images in my research, I can write books. explaining to the world about my research, etc. So aerial photography is absolutely of the essence. And again, this builds up my database, which I believe is the most comprehensive database in the whole of the UK.
Mm-hmm. What about any permits or licenses? Does this also affect your availability to do the research? That also would add up, I'm assuming, right?
Oh yes, yes indeed. I don't have to have a license because I don't. I'm not a pilot. I'm the photographer. I rely on the pilot. But then I have to pay the lab costs, obviously, to my research. When I hire rooms to do the research, I have to pay for those. And quite often, many of the scientists most generously give their time for free, but not all of them. And this is understandable, quite naturally. And then, of course, I have my travel, which is absolutely enormous.
Okay.
Yes.
I see. Well, that would make sense that you'd want to ask, for more funding and so forth.
Well, yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Indeed, it does.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you also mentioned your scientific work on people affected with Parkinson's. And you went into great detail regarding that and so forth. But I want to ask...
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I want to ask you, what about the effects on people who don't have Parkinson's, who have actually gone into the crop circles? Have you or anyone or any researcher have made any measurable physiological effects on people? Has there been any?
This is actually my main database. In fact, again, I got the largest database in the world. And again, I think this is going to be of huge importance in years to come as to what is happening to people. And the effects are so many and so varied. And I've got well over 800 reports on my database as to what happens to people. What I'm really examining and investigating is the effects of electromagnetic fields on living systems. And that is to say, what is happening to us, what is happening to animals, and what is happening to electrical equipment. And I went to the Royal School of Medicine with a scientific science colleague of mine several years ago. And as I was saying, the effects are so very varied that we needed to put them into categories. And the categories we put them into, and I don't want people to be alarmed, the first category was oral, and that includes taste. Now, taste included in this is a very, very strange taste that is, I call a metallic taste. And this happens when people, and certainly if I've experienced it several times, I go into a crop circle and all of a sudden I get this strange, cloying taste in my mouth, and I can't spit it out, I can't get rid of it. And then when I leave the circle, it disappears just as quickly as it came. The moment I started speaking about this, other people also mentioned they'd had it. In fact, several people feel that is a sort of litmus test for evaluating the validity of the circle. Then there's tooth pain and unusual thirst. Cranial, which is another heading, a lot of headaches. Ocular, vision changes, and hallucinations. And we get many, many hallucinations. What happens to people when they go into circles? And they imagine quite different things to what actually is happening on the ground. Auditory, that's acoustics, hearing voices, hearing music. Gut, that's nausea, diarrhea, sudden hunger, etc. Now, sudden hunger, that's an extraordinary thing, because I'm not normally a hungry person, and in fact I'm quite a slim person, naturally. And I remember one time, I got lots of reports of people being terribly hungry when they went into crop circles, and I thought, well, what a curious thing. And one time I was doing tests, and on the endocrine system, which is all to do with one's glands. And we'd done the tests beforehand. Then we had lunch, and then we went into a circle. And having just had lunch, I was absolutely staggered to find that I was ravenous. I couldn't believe it. So I thought, this is an extraordinary thing. Very often, in order to believe something, you have to experience it yourself. And I think this is very true of crop circles, because many people poo-poo them. They poo-poo the circle, the phenomenon as a whole. And then suddenly they go into a circle and something very, very extraordinary happens to them. Then we come to systemic, dizziness, weak knees, leg pain. Now, leg pain is it's one that afflicts an awful lot of people. And there was one extraordinary circle on the 7th of July in 2007. We called it 070707. And again, this was very extraordinary from many aspects, because somebody was sitting on top of the Wansdyke, and he got his infrared camera, and he is pretty convinced he saw part of this actually forming. We did see, because it was taken in detail, and by enlarging the film, we could see that in fact part of the formation had already arrived by the time he was up there. What happened to the other part, this is still under debate. But a friend of mine went into this formation the day it happened, and she knelt down in one of the little circles. Well, that night she had such excruciating leg pain that she was reduced to lying on the floor. And she just thought, when is this pain going to go? And it was something she'd never experienced before. Well, a couple of days later, I went in with my scientific team to do tests in this circle. And one of the scientists, Hazel Drummond, who uses the Asara technique, it was Professor William Tiller who said this was one of the most reliable diagnostic techniques. As she was walking up the tram line towards the circle, she suddenly had this feeling of entering into another space. And she knew that she was within the aura of the circle, which is a pretty good indication that that's a genuine circle. We got inside the circle, and I always dowse with my pendulum or my rods for the place where we should be doing the tests. Having set up, we then wandered around, and Hazel started jumping around just like she was a schoolgirl. She said, I never jumped around like this for years and years and years. Well, we did the tests, and later that night, I had, again, the most frightful leg pains. And I was amazed. This was exactly the same as my friend had experienced, and I got out of bed hoping they would go, and they didn't. And I got a 4-post to bed, and I clung to one of the 4 posts in absolute, sheer, undescribable agony. And I thought, now, how long is this going to go on for? Because I don't think I can bear it for much longer. And yet you have no escape. And it was just unbelievably painful. And eventually it went. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, the next day I'm going to look at my legs and they're going to be covered in bruises. In fact, there wasn't a sign. There wasn't a mark. And I was so perplexed by this, and also by the story of my friend, which was absolutely identical, what had happened to our legs. I went to see my doctor, and she said, well, this is a nerve pain. She said it is usually sheer, extraordinary agony. And she said, all she said was, well, you deal with radiation. And she passed it off like that. So we had the leg pain, and then the last category is quite a large one. It's mental. This is where our thought processes are affected. We have short-term memory loss. and very strange. You often feel that you've been in a circle for just a few seconds, and yet you've been in there for an hour. You just lose all sense of time. Feelings of panic. This has happened to one or two people. They go in and they suddenly feel uneasy, and it sort of rises and rises in them. And there was one of my friends, he literally took to his heels and he fled out of the circle. Then on the other side of the coin, there's wonderful feelings of peace and love and light. And then we come to disorientation and a sense of a presence. But another extraordinary thing is, us Brits, we are very reserved. And we don't normally talk to people we don't know. In fact, men who go up in the train, they go into the same carriage every single morning, come back in the same carriage every single evening. They may travel in the same carriage with the same men, and all they do is nod and say good morning or good evening, and then hide themselves behind their newspapers. Mm-hmm. No conversation. They probably don't even know each other's names. Well, a very strange thing happens in crop circles. You find that you go in, and suddenly you are talking to everybody. And there's a curious feeling of oneness and unification. It's very, very hard to describe. It is actually a lovely feeling. It's a feeling of
unity consciousness.
What?
Unity consciousness.
Well, yes, indeed, it could indeed. But you know, many of these things. This is where my research comes in, because many of these things have a scientific explanation. And I was talking to a scientific friend of mine, and she said, that is when the hypothalamus goes into overdrive, or it's where it's triggered in the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is a very important part of the forebrain, and it lies just below the thalamus and forms the lower part of the ventricle and its floor. Mm-hmm. That's the area it is. And its integrity is essential to life because it's concerned with our vegetative functions. And it also plays a major part in regulating the temperature of our body weight, our appetite, and also our blood pressure and fluid balance. So it's really, really a very, very important gland. And it's even been said that it's possibly the physical basis of the emotions. So this is one explanation for that particular effect. But there are many, many others, many other events. And a lot of people over the years have thought, well, all Lucy's reports are sent in by people with overactive imaginations. And you only have to read some of the reports to realize, well, in fact, I don't paraphrase them because they're written almost like sort of road to Damascus experiences. But animals don't suffer from overactive imaginations. And there's one lovely story I've got here of somebody called Mary Spain, who had a most beautiful grey Burmese cat called Rupert. And she took Rupert with her absolutely everywhere. He was on a collar and lead, and he was a very, very sagacious, well-behaved cat. And a group from London came down, and I was going to give them a talk in the morning and then take them into a crop circle. This was in the millennium, the year 2000. And after the talk, we went into the circle. And it was a strange, strange day. It was a day when you had thunderstorms and lightning, and then it cleared up and the sun came out. Every single possible type of atmospheric condition was experienced. And we were also in part of the country where there were wonderful sort of hills, and you felt as though you were, it's very ancient landscape. Felt as though you were walking in the footsteps of your ancestors. Anyhow, this is what she wrote about Rupert. The most interesting aspect of Rupert's reaction was that he behaved exactly as he does when visiting a church. He has visited numerous country churches on our travels. He was respectful, quiet, alert, and very interested. Another interesting thing was that uninvited, he went up to a stranger sitting meditated and sat down beside her. Although he is always perfectly polite to strangers, he is not normally friendly to this extent and has never sat on anybody's lap but mine. And then she adds a P.S. at the end. It may be coincidence, but Rupert's constipation problems were sorted out after this experience.
Interesting.
So extraordinary things happen. And Mary went to get her hair done at the end of the week. And the hairdresser said, "What on earth has happened to your hair, Mrs. Fane? It's standing up on end." And she said, "Yes, I know." She said, "I haven't been able to do a thing with it since I went into a circle."
Wow. That's pretty funny here. Lucy, I wanted to ask you, for the most part, we are all psychics. Some of us are more sensitive and intuitive to being psychic, but has anyone ever brought in someone who has really heightened sense of awareness into these crop circles, maybe a psychic or a medium, just out of curiosity?
Well, I think we're all very psychic. There is one medium who I know, she was very, very involved in the crop circles for a long time, called Mary Kingston. She's a lovely person. I did take a psychic round Avebury, and that was the most extraordinary thing. Avebury is a complex, a very, very ancient stone complex, and William Stupely, who was an historian in the 17th century, and he is one of the people to whom we owe an enormous debt, because he recorded how Stonehenge was in those days and how Avebury was, and of course they've changed over time. And he said, well, if Stonehenge is a church, Avebury is a cathedral. And this friend of mine, she suddenly went back in time, and she saw little tiny huts, and she saw very small people. They were slightly darker skinned than we are. And she said people were queuing up outside these huts. And she said as they came out, they seemed to be carrying something. It was almost as though this was a healing center, and people were healing up, were lining up to go inside and coming out with their little bags of herbs. And then another thing, she said, how extraordinary, look at those long-eared rabbits. And then she came out of her trance, and she said, I've never seen long-eared rabbits like that before. And I said, no, what we were seeing was actually hares. Now, hares were indigenous to England at that time. Rabbits were introduced much, much, much later on from Australia. But she'd gone right back. And this also brings us into a story of somebody called Ron Russell, where he was visiting a crop circle with a friend one evening. And it was the day where, in fact, you had film in your camera. And he'd run out of film, so he thought, well, I'll just go back to the car and get some film. Well, as he started walking towards the car, he suddenly found that the tram lines, and those are lines that run up and down the field, and they're used by the farmers in order to sow and to spray. It's for the ease, really, of agriculture. And he found that the tram lines had disappeared, and that the ground was getting rougher and rougher. He couldn't understand what was happening to him. And then he came upon some bushes, and beyond the bushes, he found a little clearing. And in that clearing, again, were huts. This was, again, very close to Avebury. And again, there was very small people, more slightly darker skinned than we were. And he said there was a bonfire, and they were dancing round his bonfire. And he suddenly realized, goodness me, I've gone back in time. And he suddenly got very worried, because he said he didn't want to intrude on them, because it might not be safe for him. They might attack him. So he hurriedly retraced his steps, and he felt, he had been gone for some considerable time, and he eventually found his way back to the circle and to his friend, and he explained what he'd seen, and he said, I've been away for ages. And the friend laughed at him, and he said, no, you've only been away a couple of minutes. So Ron said, well, listen, come along with me. I want to show you what I found. You don't believe my story. So they both went off, and within a couple of minutes, they were back at the car.
Now, you said this was at Avebury?
This was at Avebury.
What about Glastonbury?
Glastonbury is a very strange place. It's a place where I find a mixed energies, because I'm a sensitive myself, and I find a mixed energies. When you find a place which is very, very energetic, and this is due to not only its history, going back to the possible story of Joseph of Arimathea and Jesus and the magical thorn tree, and of course a Tor, which is that huge hill with a sort of monument at the top, and it's all designed like a labyrinth going round the hill, and a labyrinth is a very sacred construction, and so you always get a mixture of energies. You get the bad competing with the good, and in fact, if bad wasn't there, you wouldn't realize there was good. Just like light and dark and black and white. So it's an interesting place. All I can tell you is that I couldn't live there.
Okay.
I've been uncomfortable. It's too energetic.
Right. Now, there have been some eyewitnesses who have stated that they've seen tubes of light, whereas others have seen orbs of light in and around the formation of crop circles, which, as I mentioned before in the first hour, could, for me, arouses the possibility that these are being created, these crop circles are being created by interdimensional beings. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think you get two different types of orbs. You get the ones which are the result of electromagnetic fields, the emanations from the energy lines that run through our planet, and certain areas that are a huge amount of energy lines or ley lines, whatever you want to call them, and they expand and contract according to how the tectonic plates in the Earth are working, and that again depends on the workings of the effects of the volcanoes and earthquakes. And when they expand, they release electromagnetic fields which can result in orbs. But then there are other orbs which seem to have an independent nature to them. And they would follow people around and behave in very, very strange and very bizarre ways. So maybe they are, I think they're possibly part of the forming process. But I was in Taos in New Mexico 18 months ago giving a talk at a wonderful Labyrinth Society conference. And Taos is a place where it's got a very strong American Indian influence, and there are many sacred places, and the Pueblo American Indians, they know where the sacred places are. They can dowse, or most of us can dowse too, but they know their landscape very well, and they construct these wonderful, wonderful labyrinths. And one of the North American, the American Indians called Akhtar, one night he constructed a labyrinth in sand, and we were all there, and we were taking photographs. And I found that my pictures were one mass of orbs. Well, they showed the labyrinth, but all around the construction of the labyrinth were these orbs. And other people had exactly the same thing. And some of them were so detailed, it almost looked as though they had a sort of cellular structure to them. And when I asked Akhtar what he thought of that, he said, those are the souls of my ancestors, which was really very lovely.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, well, I like to focus on the message, on the language of the glyphs. It's been stated that the use of symbolism is universal in scope and maybe even multi-layered. In your many years of studying this phenomenon, have you encountered any success in deciphering these symbols?
Certain ones are very obvious.
Uh-huh.
The pi formation at Barbary Castle
Mm-hmm.
several years ago, that was pi to the power of 9. That's a mathematical constant which represents the ratio of any circle's circumference to its diameter.
Mm-hmm.
Then a couple of years later we had one which was very, very similar to Lawrence Euler. Lawrence Euler was an extraordinary man. He saw everything in figures and numbers, and his theorem was so complex that it was said that only he really truly understood the full meaning of it. Then we have another one at Crabwood near Winchester, which was unmistakably an ET, and there was a little disc, and that had a message inside it. Certain ones are very clear. The message is very clear. Other ones, the message is ambiguous. And just as this phenomenon invites everybody to participate, from scientists to theologians to artists to musicians to people who are interested in genealogy, in custom, in tradition. So they will interpret the circles according to the way they see them. And so far as I'm concerned, this is actually one of the joys and one of the benefits of the crop circles, that it includes everybody. And everybody's interpretation, not only is it right for them, but so far as I'm concerned, it is totally right. And I never criticize anybody's interpretation, because to them it is a very important meaning.
Interesting. Well, and looking at these crop circles, I'm also noticing what appears like DNA patterns, like helixes, spirals, wormholes comes to mind, planetary alignments, floral patterns, and of course mathematical symbolism like trigonometry, sine waves, and fractals. Do you believe that the progression of these crop circle formations from a very simple circular formation to the more complex, that in effect they are giving us maybe an alphabet, so to speak, or something to chew on, to really think about?
I think that's very possible, because it's a truly evolving a phenomenon. And it's rather like, when you're 2, you don't go to university. You start off at home learning, and then you go to a nursery school, and then you might go to primary, and then you go to secondary, and so it goes on. And you learn very gradually. And this is what seems to me to be happening in the crop circle world. A couple of years ago, I was sent a lovely email by somebody who said, I find that gazing at pictures of crop circles brings on a very meditative state for me, and I love to use your book because there isn't a lot of text to distract me, and the photos are stunning. And she said, as she was looking at one of the photographs, a word suddenly came to her, which she'd never used before and she'd never heard before, and that word was didactic. And so she looked it up in the dictionary, and she found this is what it said: designed or intended to teach, intended to convey instruction and information, as well as pleasure and entertainment. So far as I'm concerned, she got it absolutely spot on, because somebody once said to me, what was the meaning of this phenomenon to me? Well, I thought a little bit, and I said, well, all I can tell you is that I've learned more in the past 25 years than I ever learned for the rest of my life prior to this, because it takes on every single phenomenon. And it also encourages to look beyond the established way of thinking, to challenge ideas. and to go beyond the box, so to speak, and to use our imagination, no matter how wacky it may be. For instance, when I started burying little bottles of water, I was considered totally wacky, and I was ridiculed by my peers. Now this is an accepted form of research, and so it goes along. But I'd just like to correct one thing, Martin, if you'd allow me.
Sure,
in my
absolutely.
first interview we were discussing the forming process of the circles, and I was discussing how they probably originate in the ionosphere, which is an area of huge atmospheric electricity, and then they spiral down to Earth in a plasma vortex, which consists of electrically charged particles. And then it hits the ground, which it's been estimated with hundreds of thousands of meters per second, but only for a nanosecond. And then the plants soften at the base and they fall quite naturally. But we were discussing on what terrain they appeared, and there have been geological tests done, and it's been found that over 90% appear on chalkland. Now, in my first interview, I said on clay, and not only did I say it once, but I said it twice. And I would like to correct it. They appear on chalkland, and this is very important because of the aquifers underneath and the release of the electromagnetic fields. But this brings us on to another aspect of what happens to the mind and how very complex the brain is. I only realized I'd made this mistake when I listened to the recording of the interview. And in fact, had I not listened to the recording and somebody had told me I had said clay instead of chalk, I would have sworn blue murder that I hadn't. So the question is, how can the brain somehow be so misleading that the wrong word comes out? The brain is it's the most complex organ in the whole body. We don't understand how it works. And I thought to myself, well, this is a really good example of most extraordinary things happening. So I've made the correction, and I'm very happy about that.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm glad we clarified that. Now, it's my understanding that the formations of the stems are not broken but bent and swirled, which may imply that some heat source is being used. Would you agree on that?
Yes, I would. It's like a microwave effect.
Yeah, and they're bent at 90 degrees, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, they're bent at 90 degrees. They're not cut, and they are not damaged. There's a lot of research. I think we spoke about this in the first interview, about how the experiments have been conducted, and it's shown that as the heat travels up the stalks, it breaks down the molecular structure as it goes. But just to get back to some of the effects, I wanted to tell you about the healing effect of somebody who'd had a very bad neck accident when he was skiing.
Right.
And he hadn't broken his neck, but he damaged it very, very badly. And over the years, it got increasingly more painful, to the point where he was only able to sleep on one side of his head, and he had to have a special pillow, and it was all a great, great problem to him. Life was difficult. And he and his wife came down to Wiltshire about 3 years ago when there was a tremendous amount of crop circles. And they visited 14. And he sent me a report because he suddenly went into one, and it happened to be shaped like a hummingbird. And he said suddenly he noticed that the pain in his neck had gone, and absolutely, totally gone. Well, he couldn't believe it. And since then, I've been in touch with him on a regular basis. In fact, I was in touch with him about a month ago, just before I gave up a talk. And he said it was fine. Absolutely. It's marvelous, because not all the healing effects we have are permanent. Some are temporary. A friend of mine with polymyalgia, which is a horrible condition. It's where your muscles are on fire, and sometimes it's so painful you can't get out of bed in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And she came into a formation with me very reluctantly because she said she couldn't walk. And I said, well, listen, come along for the drive. But anyhow, she hobbled along on her walking stick. And when she got back to the car, all her pain was gone. And that lasted for 92 hours,
Mm-hmm.
which is quite good going. But the fact of the matter is that we don't know exactly what is happening to people in the crop circle, and this is why research is absolutely vital. I mean, the amount of electrical failures we get demonstrates that something is happening on a regular basis. A friend of mine, we'd been doing scientific tests, and in a formation at Hackden, wonderful formation, and he went to fill up with petrol or gasoline afterwards, and he found he couldn't because he'd taken his credit cards into the formation, and they had been wiped clean. And it wasn't the only example. Somebody who came all the way from the States to be with me on one of my tours had booked in at an hotel. When he got back to the hotel that evening, he couldn't get into his room because the card had been wiped. We've had key failures where people have been in the crop circle. They've tried to get back into their car afterwards, and their key again has been wiped. So things are happening, and I would suggest you'll be very, very careful what you actually take into a crop circle.
Mm-hmm. What about cell phones?
Cell phones, yes, they malfunction. And it's very curious sometimes. A friend of mine, he was so bemused by this that his cell phone he'd been talking on his cell phone walking up to the formation, got inside and it wouldn't work. So he went outside again and it worked again. And this is what has happened to me when I've been flying.
Yes, I was going to ask you that because some videos have been produced where they actually show the cameraman with the camera inside the crop circle. And most of these cameras are digital, the modern ones. So I'm wondering, is this an intermittent type of energy that's happening for people?
Well, it's certainly when I've flown over the circle. Sometimes this was largely when I've had, except my camera broke when I was flying over one this summer. That was not funny. Broke completely.
Wow.
And the whole shutter system went. But previously, I've had many occasions where I've been flying over circles, and we've just got the perfect shot in my frame, and the camera won't work. And we fly away, it works perfectly well. Fly back, won't work. Fly away, it will work. And I can tell you, it's absolutely infuriating.
Right.
And there was one pilot many years ago who found that his instruments went completely haywire, and he said, well, he wasn't going to fly over the circles anymore. So things do happen, but you know, we were talking about experiencing things for oneself.
Right.
There was one woman who came up to me after a talk, and she said, you know, I've been to every single talk I could. I've read every single book I could on the subject. But she said it wasn't until I actually went into the circle myself that I really, truly experienced what it was like. And it is so lovely. I mean, all the reports I gave you seem to be very dire reports. And indeed, I suffered many of them myself. But I've also suffered experienced wonderful effects. And I think the reason I get so many negative reports is because people, when they are planning to visit a crop circle, think they're going to have a wonderful time and are expecting to feel very well, and are thoroughly demoralized or profound. They can't believe what's happened to them when they don't feel well. And this is when they very kindly send me in reports. And so far as feeling well, if they feel a little bit extra well, they wouldn't send me a report because they would have expected to feel a little bit extra well as it is.
Right.
So it's only when I get healing reports or feelings of euphoria, which people do experience, they feel, and they get feelings of wonderful calmness and peace. And it's just beautiful. I take a couple of tours around each summer.
Interesting. Which leads me to ask you, Lucy, what advice would you offer the typical tourist who wants to venture to the UK and visit these sacred spots? I'm asking because there are some tourists out there who do congregate at, say, a temple and forget to respect the sacredness of these sites.
Well, yes, this is a very good question and a very important question. I feel that all these sites have their own particular energy. It's rather like the Gaia, the energy of the earth, and we should be respecting everything on this planet, everything from the natural world. And when I go up to stones, I always ask if I can approach them, because I feel I step inside their aura. We've all got an electromagnetic field around us, and the stones have their electromagnetic field. And I always ask before I enter their electromagnetic field, may I come in, so to speak. It's rather like visiting somebody and you knock on the door. May I please come in? And it's the same with crop circles. They have an electromagnetic field, and it's always good to ask if you may come in.
Right. Okay. Well, Lucy, in wrapping up the second hour, what messages do you have for our listeners on crop circles?
I would say enjoy them, but just one. It may sound very sort of schoolmarmish, but just to remember that the crop circles are on farmers' land, and the farmers plant their crops, and this is their livelihood. So please enjoy the circles, but please will you ask the farmers before you go in. Please don't walk straight across their crops. You can see where you can go in if you work out the tram line that you can go into, which will take you straight into it. Then you will go in and you won't damage the crop. But I'm having a meeting with the farmers next week because the circles provide a huge economic boost to Wiltshire and various other places, from hotels, pubs, right throughout the economy. Now, the only people who don't benefit are the farmers. And this seems to me quite illogical and ironical, because if it weren't for the farmers and their fields, there wouldn't be any crop circles. The farmer's land is the canvas on which these things appear, and yet whereas everybody else is profiting, the farmers aren't. Their crops are very often destroyed by people going in and totally disrespecting the land. So this is where I'm having a meeting with the farmers, as I say, next week, and we've got to try and work something out whereby they are protected and they are compensated.
Yes, because it is private property. And,
it is.
People can get really, they can get really boisterous. They can just trample on anyone's property. I mean, I mentioned this question because I recall hearing an interview with Carmen Bolter. I'm not certain if you're familiar with her, but she has done many videos on Egypt. And she mentioned how many tourists would congregate at these temples asking themselves or other people to take my picture. And what it does is that it creates a certain chaotic energy in the air where beforehand it was nice and quiet. So I'm figuring the same noise level with these tourists, and some people, they just tend to forget their manners. They just trample the field, and they want to take pictures and take my picture. And people need to be more observant of. And
I once saw somebody. I couldn't believe it. There was one most beautiful little circle and an absolutely lovely center to it. And she was quite a big woman,
Right.
and she was sitting right on top of the beautiful center.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe my eyes. She had absolutely vilified that circle,
Wow.
and she'd ruined it for everybody. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's all a matter of ego then, obviously.
It's just dreadful.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah.
Well, Lucy, care to remind our listeners of your website again and any speaking engagements you have planned for this year?
Well, my speaking and engagements are on my website, and my website address is lucypringle.co.uk. And if anybody feels that they could possibly be generous enough to make a donation, you will find a link to my PayPal account, and anything you can give would be so very gratefully received.
Great. Awesome, Lucy. Well, I want to thank you again for being gracious and patient and offering your time for the second hour here, and I certainly do hope to talk to you again soon.
Well, it's been a pleasure. And
Thank you.
if people give, they're giving a gift to the phenomenon as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Lucy, once again, and I hope to talk to you again soon, okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. That's it for today's program. If you're not a member, please visit holisticadvocate.com and subscribe. Or if you prefer, please donate. Your contribution will be greatly appreciated. Thank you.